Good evening. Welcome to Unwind University, where our quiet journeys through time offer a gentle path to a restful night. Tonight, our thoughts will simply drift back, not with urgency, but with a soft, steady current, to an age long past. We are not rushing, merely observing, as we prepare to explore a period when a remarkable empire in the East held steadfast against the currents of history, much like a lighthouse silently enduring a slow-moving tide. It was, in many ways, a gentle echo of Rome's enduring spirit, yet it carved its own unique and intricate story into the fabric of the world, a story we'll softly uncover, layer by calm layer. Imagine, if you will, a great city standing proudly on the crossroads of continents, a beacon of civilization for over 1,000 years. This wasn't the Rome of Caesar and gladiators, but a different iteration, born from its legacy, yet distinct in its character. It was an empire that, through subtle adaptation and quiet resilience, managed to preserve ancient knowledge and traditions even as the Western world underwent profound changes. Think of it not as a roar, but as a persistent, melodious hum, carrying the threads of antiquity through the ages. Its longevity wasn't always glamorous or dramatic. Often, it was simply about patient governance, careful diplomacy, and an enduring belief in its own purpose, a quiet strength that underpinned centuries. We won't delve into battles or grand conquests tonight, but rather the quiet pulse of its daily life, the slow evolution of its culture, and the subtle ways it influenced the world around it. This Eastern Empire, often referred to as Byzantine by historians, but known to its own people simply as the continuation of Rome, offers a fascinating study in endurance. Its story is less about explosive events and more about the gradual accumulation of time, the subtle shifts in art and thought, and the profound, yet often overlooked, impact it had on the formation of both Eastern and Western societies. It existed not as a flash, but as a long, steady glow on the horizon of history. As we settle into this exploration, let us remember that history isn't always about the loudest voices or the most turbulent eras. Sometimes the most compelling narratives are found in the steadfastness, in the quiet continuity, and in the persistent whisper of an empire that refused to vanish. Tonight, we will simply allow ourselves to be guided by these gentle whispers, letting them carry us back to a time when stability and tradition held a profound sway, inviting us to simply listen to its quiet story as the day slowly gives way to the tranquil peace of the evening. And so, as we allow ourselves to drift along with these quiet stories, away from the more commonly heard narratives of the West, our journey slowly carries us towards a different horizon, a place where the Roman world unfolded in its own unique rhythm. Far across the vast stretches of land and sea, in the empire's eastern half, a new kind of light began to flicker, softly, steadily, forming its own distinct destiny. This was a realm where the foundations of civilization were already ancient, deeply laid by cultures that had flourished for millennia. The cities here were often older, their stones worn smooth by countless generations, and the trade routes were more established, weaving intricate patterns of commerce and ideas across continents with an almost timeless regularity. Unlike some parts of the West, where newness and adaptation were constant necessities, the East possessed a profound sense of continuity, a quiet strength that absorbed change rather than being overwhelmed by it. It was a place where Greek remained a language of learning and administration alongside Latin, and where a rich tapestry of beliefs and traditions had long coexisted, patiently shaping the character of the land and its people. This eastern domain, with its deep roots and its vibrant cultural life, was not simply a mirror image of the old Rome. It was something else entirely, a gradual evolution, a different path unfolding with measured steps, promising a lasting, quiet resilience. And within this vast, complex, yet remarkably stable realm, the gaze of the empire began to settle upon a particular location. It was not merely a random choice, but a deliberate act, envisioning a place that could serve as the beating heart for this enduring Eastern spirit. A place where imperial authority could find a new, firm footing, where ancient traditions could be honored, and where a new chapter of Roman continuity could be written, slowly, patiently, over the centuries. This special place, poised between continents, would soon begin its transformation, becoming a magnificent center, a radiant symbol of power and perseverance, a city destined to house the very emperors themselves, quietly, steadfastly, becoming the embodiment of this enduring legacy. And so, at the very heart of this vast, slowly evolving empire, poised between two continents, there emerged a magnificent city. This was Constantinople, a name that would resonate through the ages, defined by its imposing, grand walls that had stood guard for ages, a formidable barrier against the outside world. Within these walls, many shimmering domes reflected the sun's gentle light, crowning countless churches and palaces. For centuries, it served as a luminous beacon of civilization, a steady point of reference in a world often in flux, a place of learning, law, and enduring faith. It quietly observed countless moments of human history unfold within its sturdy embrace, each day adding another layer to its silent, rich narrative. Within these formidable walls, the city pulsed with a quiet, persistent life. The sounds of daily commerce in its bustling forums mingled softly with the distant chanting from its great churches, all under the watchful gaze of its imperial institutions. Its strategic position, overlooking the narrow straits, made it not only a vital crossroads for trade, but also a unique meeting point of diverse cultures and profound ideas, all held together by the steady hand of imperial rule. Constantinople stood as a living testament to continuity, a physical manifestation of Roman perseverance, patiently absorbing the whispers of past emperors and the quiet hopes of future generations, all without haste, without pause, simply enduring. The emperors themselves resided here, their grand palaces nestled among the city's monumental structures, their decrees quietly emanating from this central seat of power. Here, the profound weight of the Roman legacy was felt most keenly, but also most steadily, guiding the slow, deliberate pace of governance. It was a place designed to last, to endure, to patiently carry forward the traditions and the authority that had once originated in a city far to the west, yet now found its new, firm footing here. Through all its long days and silent nights, this city remained, a patient observer, a silent guardian, a persistent heart of the empire. Over many, many years, as emperors came and went, each left their own distinctive mark upon the city and the empire it governed. Some simply maintained what was already there, ensuring stability and order, while others harbored grander ambitions, envisioning new heights of splendor and influence for their vast realm. It was within the very fabric of this enduring city that one particular emperor would later conceive of an extraordinary vision, a sweeping dream of renewal and reconstruction, aiming to restore a past glory and shape a magnificent future, slowly and deliberately, in a time that would become truly golden. And so, as the centuries unfolded within the resilient heart of Constantinople, a singular vision began to take shape in the mind of Emperor Justinian. He imagined a sweeping return to former splendors, a careful rebuilding of what had been lost, piece by quiet piece. His ambition was not merely to maintain, but to restore, to gather again the scattered fragments of a vast and ancient legacy. It was a dream of unity, both territorial and spiritual, reaching far beyond the city walls, seeking to knit together a tapestry that had long frayed. Under his long reign, a quiet but determined effort unfolded across the Mediterranean world. Fleets and legions were dispatched to distant shores, not with the aim of new conquest, but with the profound intention of rejoining territories that had once been part of a grander whole. Places like North Africa and Italy, long separated from the Eastern heart, were slowly drawn back into the fold, through persistent campaigns that aimed for a peaceful reincorporation, however challenging the path. This grand endeavor, though arduous, was a cornerstone of his overarching plan, reflecting a deep longing for a lost imperial unity. Yet Justinian's vision extended far beyond the battlefield or the map. He understood that a truly enduring empire required more than regained lands. It needed a foundation of clear, consistent rule. And so a monumental project began, the systematic compilation and revision of Roman law. Expert scholars worked diligently to gather centuries of legal pronouncements, to organize them, to clarify them, creating a cohesive body of law that would serve as a guide for generations. This intricate legal framework, designed to bring order and justice, became another pillar of his golden dream, intended to shape the very fabric of society for ages to come, long after his own voice had faded. This period, marked by such profound ambition in both governance and geography, indeed carried a soft glow of renewed strength across the empire. It was a time when the echoes of ancient Rome seemed to resonate once more, reinterpreted through a distinctively Eastern lens. With the territories slowly reconnected and the laws thoughtfully codified, Justinian also turned his profound attention to the visible splendor of his capital. He envisioned monumental structures, buildings that would not only inspire awe, but would also embody the very spirit of his rejuvenated empire, standing as quiet, towering declarations of faith and power for all to behold. Within the very heart of Constantinople, as if drawing breath from the city's aspirations, there indeed rose an edifice of unparalleled scale and beauty, known simply as Hagia Sophia. Its name, meaning holy wisdom, truly captured the profound ambition and spiritual devotion embedded within its very foundations. From the moment its construction began, it was clear that this was not merely another grand building. It was a physical manifestation of imperial power intertwined with a deeply held Christian faith, intended to stand as a singular, unifying testament for generations to come. The most striking feature of this colossal cathedral was, without a doubt, its truly vast dome, seemingly suspended in the air with a lightness that belied its immense weight. This dome, a true marvel of ancient engineering, was an audacious architectural feat, pushing the boundaries of what was thought possible at the time. It soared hundreds of feet above the ground, creating an internal space so immense that it could easily contain within it the bustling streets and quiet courtyards of smaller towns. Light would stream in through its many windows, illuminating the intricate mosaics and polished marble surfaces below, giving the impression of a sacred space bathed in an ethereal glow, a gentle whisper of the divine made manifest. Every mosaic tile, every carefully cut stone, every arch and column within Hagia Sophia spoke not just of human artistry, but also of a deep, abiding faith. For centuries, this building served as the principal cathedral of an empire, a place where emperors were crowned, where significant religious ceremonies unfolded, and where countless ordinary people sought solace and spiritual connection. Its sheer scale and the intricate beauty of its design still inspire a gentle awe in those who contemplate its long history, standing as a silent, majestic witness to the passage of time and the enduring power of belief. This magnificent structure in Constantinople stood as a paramount symbol of Christian devotion, a towering declaration of the singular faith that bound the empire. Yet, even as such grand statements of unity were being constructed in the imperial capital, the understanding and practice of that very faith were evolving across the vast Roman world. Different traditions, different ways of worship, and even different interpretations of Scripture were quietly taking root in other important centers, each developing their own profound expressions of belief, like distinct streams flowing from a shared ancient source, beginning to trace subtly varied paths across the landscape of time. As those distinct streams of faith began to trace subtly varied paths across the landscape of time, the Christian world, while united in its core beliefs, found itself quietly developing along two prominent lines. On one side stood the ancient city of Rome, in the western half of the Old Empire, where the Bishop of Rome, or the Pope, held a unique and growing spiritual authority. On the other, far to the east, was the shining new capital of Constantinople, where the Patriarch guided a vibrant and intellectually rich Christian tradition, deeply intertwined with the imperial court itself. While they shared the same fundamental faith, their ways of seeing it and practicing it began to diverge, like two majestic rivers that flow from the same mountain spring, but through different valleys, shaping distinct landscapes along their courses. Over many generations, these differences, initially small, began to accumulate, becoming more pronounced. There were variations in language, with Latin dominant in the West and East in Greek, which naturally led to different interpretations of Scripture and theological emphases. Liturgical practices, the forms and rituals of worship, also evolved along separate lines, creating distinct sensory experiences for the faithful. Even the understanding of authority differed. The West increasingly saw the Bishop of Rome as the ultimate head of the entire Church, while the East viewed him as first among equals, respecting his honor, but not necessarily his absolute command over other ancient patriarchates. These were not sudden ruptures, but rather a slow, almost imperceptible drift, like the gradual movement of tectonic plates that only reveal their vast separation over immense spans of geological time. This quiet parting of ways wasn't marked by a single dramatic event, but rather by a series of gradual misunderstandings, cultural shifts, and theological nuances that slowly pulled the two halves further apart. Communication became less frequent, and when it did occur, it was often through the filter of different languages and evolving customs. What had once been a single, albeit vast, Christian community began to feel like two distinct branches of the same sacred tree. They still honored the same root, the same ancient stories and saints, but their growth patterns, their foliage, and even their fruit were becoming uniquely their own, developing separate identities within the overarching framework of their shared faith. Yet, even as the Christian world was undergoing these internal transformations,
Focusing inward on its theological and liturgical evolution, the broader world around them was not standing still. Beyond the borders of their familiar realms, new powers were quietly rising, and the distant winds were beginning to carry whispers of challenges and changes that would soon demand their attention, shifting their gaze from internal matters to the formidable presence of forces gathering on the horizon.
Beyond the borders of those familiar realms, where internal theological discussions quietly unfolded, the wider world indeed continued its slow, inexorable turning. For centuries, the empire had stood as a venerable beacon, a fixed point against a shifting tapestry of peoples and powers. Its very existence often meant it became a magnet for both admiration and ambition, drawing the attention of those who lived just beyond its well-guarded frontiers, bringing new challenges with the passing seasons. From the east, ancient, formidable adversaries represented a continuous, deep-seated pressure, a rivalry that had spanned generations, demanding constant vigilance and a significant dedication of resources. But alongside these enduring opponents, new peoples also arrived from various directions. They came sometimes as nomadic groups, quietly shifting across vast steppes, and sometimes as larger migrations, seeking new lands or simply encountering the empire's extensive borders. Each encounter adding a new layer to the complex tapestry of external relations. Yet, despite this constant, varied pressure from distant neighbors and new arrivals, the empire developed a remarkable resilience. It found ways to endure through the gentle turning of the centuries, adapting its strategies, sometimes yielding a little, sometimes standing firm, always seeking that delicate balance that allowed its core institutions and its way of life to persist. This was not always achieved through grand victories, but often through patient diplomacy, carefully managed defenses, and a deep-seated understanding of its own enduring identity amidst a world that was perpetually changing around it. As these external challenges mounted, and as the empire constantly reevaluated its strength and purpose in the face of such persistent pressures, a quiet re-examination of its own internal life began to take root. Questions began to surface about what truly defined their sacred spaces and their devotional practices. The very images that adorned their churches, their homes, and their public squares, which had long served as comforting windows into the divine, would slowly, almost imperceptibly, draw the empire's attention inward, leading to a profound and deeply significant contemplation of their true meaning and proper place within their faith. This thoughtful contemplation, extending its reach like a quiet morning mist, gradually brought forth a period of gentle discussion concerning these very images. For a time, a subtle internal debate began to stir, softly rippling through the various corners of the land. It was not a loud or sudden outburst, but rather a slow, considered unfolding of different perspectives, much like the changing light of a long afternoon. People, from learned scholars in their quiet studies to the humble faithful in their daily routines, began to ponder the role and significance of sacred representations. Some found deep comfort and inspiration in the visual presence of saints and divine narratives, feeling that these images served as helpful bridges to the spiritual realm, aiding their prayers and strengthening their understanding. They believed that these depictions were not idols to be worshipped themselves, but rather venerable windows through which the divine could be glimpsed, offering a tangible focus for devotion. Their presence in homes and churches provided a constant, quiet reminder of their faith's enduring truths, a comforting anchor in the ebb and flow of daily life. Yet others, equally devout and sincere, began to express a different view. They wondered if, perhaps, too much emphasis was being placed on these visual aids. There was a gentle concern that, over time, the line between reverence for the image and true worship of the divine being it represented might become blurred. They advocated for a simpler, more direct form of worship, fearing that the beauty and intricacy of the images could inadvertently distract from the true essence of spiritual communion. This was a sincere and thoughtful questioning, born from a desire to ensure purity of faith, not a sharp rebuke or a heated confrontation. These differing views coexisted, woven into the quiet fabric of the empire's spiritual life. It was a time marked by thoughtful introspection, where the gentle currents of discussion flowed back and forth, slowly shaping a more nuanced understanding. The questions, once surface ripples, began to settle, allowing for a deeper appreciation of the complexities involved. As this period of quiet deliberation matured, the empire gradually began to find a path toward a resolution, a subtle shift towards a more settled consensus, gently preparing the way for a time when the waters of debate would calm, and a new era of shared understanding and renewed peace would begin to softly emerge. Following those times of quiet deliberation, where the waters of debate had slowly begun to calm, and a deeper appreciation for complexities had subtly settled, a new era began to gently unfold. The empire, having navigated a period of various struggles and necessary internal adjustments, found itself poised on the cusp of a calmer chapter, a soft turning point in its long and storied journey. It was during this delicate transition that a new dynastic house gradually ascended to prominence. Through a patient and methodical approach, this leadership began to foster a more profound sense of stability across the vast territories. Their arrival marked not a sudden dramatic shift, but rather a gentle re-establishment of order, much like a quiet tide slowly returning to the shore after a period of distant murmuring. This era saw a quiet resurgence of imperial authority, a subtle reawakening of confidence, and a renewed sense of unified purpose within the heart of the state. The echoes of past difficulties began to recede further into the background, allowing for a more settled rhythm of life to gently emerge. With this deepening tranquility, the conditions for quiet growth slowly ripened. Trade routes, once fraught with uncertainty, became somewhat more predictable, permitting goods and ideas to flow with a little more ease across the empire's boundaries. Within its cities and the various centers of learning, a gentle flourishing of culture began to take root, nurtured by a renewed sense of peace. Scholars found quiet encouragement, artisans refined their crafts with meticulous care, and a soft appreciation for beauty and knowledge quietly blossomed, subtly enriching the everyday fabric of existence. The empire, during these calmer decades, gradually rediscovered a gentle yet profound inner strength. This was not a strength born of aggressive expansion or loud, urgent declarations, but rather one derived from internal cohesion, steady governance, and a quiet confidence in its own enduring legacy. It was a strength that allowed for a measured approach to both internal affairs and external relations, cultivating a period of relative quietude that settled over the land like a soft, comforting blanket. As these years of gentle rebuilding and quiet cultural bloom slowly drew to a close, the stage was subtly being prepared. The stable foundations laid by this thoughtful, stabilizing dynasty would soon serve as the sturdy groundwork for the emergence of a particularly influential family, one whose foresight and steadfast leadership would guide the empire into an even more pronounced era of resurgence, a time often remembered as the Komnenian period, where ancient strengths would be revisited and new glories softly charted, allowing for a deeper, more enduring peace to gently settle. The Komnenos family, indeed, gradually stepped forward to take the reins of this enduring empire, ushering in a distinct period that sought to re-establish a sense of calm and order. Their leadership emerged during a time when careful attention was much needed, and they quietly began the arduous but necessary work of mending and consolidating. It was a phase marked by a gentle recovery, where the empire's institutions, previously strained, were carefully nurtured back towards health. This was not a sudden burst of energy, but rather a patient, measured process of renewal, allowing a steadying influence to spread across the land, much like a quiet dawn gradually illuminating a landscape. Under their watchful guidance, a welcome stability began to settle over the vast territories. Administrative reforms were thoughtfully introduced, not with dramatic flourishes, but with a quiet efficiency that aimed to streamline and strengthen the state's internal workings. Trade routes, once perhaps a little less secure, found a renewed sense of safety, allowing goods and ideas to flow more freely, contributing to a slow but perceptible economic resurgence. The daily lives of many across the empire seemed to find a more predictable rhythm, a quiet reassurance that stability was gradually taking root, fostering a sense of a future that felt more certain and less fraught with immediate anxieties. Beyond these internal domestic achievements, the Komnenos dynasty also quietly demonstrated a notable degree of military prowess. This was not always about grand, sweeping conquests, but often about the shrewd reassertion of borders and the methodical re-establishment of the empire's defensive capabilities. Their generals and strategists, acting with a measured confidence, worked to secure frontiers and regain lost ground, ensuring the empire could stand firm against various external pressures. This careful application of strength provided a protective blanket, allowing the internal peace and recovery to continue undisturbed, reinforcing the overall sense of a secure and revitalized realm. The empire, therefore, slowly found its feet again, regaining a quiet confidence in its own capabilities, both at home and along its extensive perimeters. This period of renewed strength and quiet confidence, however, existed within a larger, slowly shifting world. As the empire gradually solidified its internal peace and extended its gentle influence, new movements were beginning to stir in distant Western lands. These stirrings, initially perceived perhaps as distant echoes, would eventually begin to ripple closer to the empire's borders, bringing with them unforeseen complexities and presenting an entirely new set of challenges that would gently draw the empire's attention beyond its carefully maintained tranquility. A new era, one of unexpected encounters and unfolding interactions, was softly beginning to take shape on the horizon, preparing to intrude upon this carefully built stability, hinting at changes that would require a different kind of vigilance. A new era, one of unexpected encounters and unfolding interactions, was softly beginning to take shape on the horizon, preparing to intrude upon this carefully built stability, hinting at changes that would require a different kind of vigilance. The echoes that had rippled closer to the empire's borders, bringing with them unforeseen complexities, eventually manifested in the arrival of distant travelers from the West. These were the Crusaders, whose movements across the landscape were often driven by a sense of faith and a desire to assist in matters that touched upon shared spiritual beliefs. Their stated purpose was, in many instances, to provide support against various adversaries and to strengthen the position of those who shared a similar religious outlook, offering a kind of military aid. However, the reality of their presence on the ground was often less straightforward than the initial intentions might have suggested. The sheer logistics of their passage, involving large numbers of people moving across unfamiliar lands, often placed a considerable strain upon the empire's resources. Provisions had to be found, pathways maintained, and accommodations managed, all of which required careful and sometimes costly coordination. Beyond these practical concerns, there were also subtle cultural differences and priorities that did not always align perfectly with the empire's long-established ways. These interactions, while often well-intentioned on both sides, occasionally led to unforeseen complications. There were moments of misunderstanding, disputes over territory or resources, and sometimes the Crusaders pursued their own agendas in ways that did not necessarily benefit the empire's overarching strategic goals. This meant that the empire found itself having to navigate not only its traditional challenges, but also the complexities introduced by these allies, whose methods and objectives could sometimes be unpredictable. Over time, this continuous interaction with the Crusaders and the gentle strain it placed on resources and diplomatic relations contributed to a gradual, almost imperceptible weakening of the empire's overall position. It was not a sudden collapse, but rather a slow, subtle erosion of absolute control and influence in certain regions. The empire, accustomed to its carefully managed stability, was now faced with an entirely new set of challenges, requiring a different kind of vigilance and a more nuanced approach to its external affairs. This period of shifting balances, of external aid bringing internal complexities, quietly began to prepare the vast and ancient empire for a new phase in its long history, a time when the enduring light of its reign might gently begin its long, slow journey towards a different kind of evening. As the enduring light of its reign indeed began its long, slow journey towards a different kind of evening, the ancient empire entered a phase of quiet transition. In these, its final centuries, a new line of emperors ascended to the throne, inheriting a legacy both grand and profoundly weighty. They understood the subtle shifts occurring within the vastness of their domain and the growing pressures from beyond its borders. Their primary endeavor was to hold the sprawling realm together, to maintain the delicate balance that had defined its long existence, and to ensure its continued, gentle functioning for as long as possible. These emperors, often thoughtful and perhaps a little melancholic, oversaw a subtle cultural blossoming. It was not a period of flamboyant innovation, but rather one of refined introspection. Scholars meticulously preserved ancient texts. Artists revisited classical forms with a quiet reverence, and philosophers pondered the nature of time and permanence. There was a deepening appreciation for the empire's long history, a gentle polishing of its accumulated wisdom, almost as if preparing a precious heirloom for a journey it might not return from, ensuring its beauty was fully recognized in its lingering moments. Yet, even amidst this refined tranquility, the challenges quietly grew. The strength of the central administration, once so formidable, began to feel the gradual wear of ages, like an ancient riverbed slowly widening and losing some of its forceful current. External peoples, once contained or gently influenced, became more assertive, their movements like distant tremors that could be felt, though not yet directly seen, within the imperial heartlands. The complexities of maintaining such a vast and venerable structure began to reveal themselves in new, persistent ways, demanding constant, careful attention. Through these years, the emperors faced their fate with a quiet resolve. There was little dramatic struggle, no desperate last stand, but rather a dignified acceptance of the slow, inevitable unfolding of historical patterns. They understood that even the grandest of empires, like all living things, eventually completed their cycle. Their rule became a long, steady vigil, a patient stewardship of what remained, ensuring that the twilight of their dynasty was one of gentle dignity, of thoughtful contemplation rather than panicked reaction, allowing the setting sun to cast its long, beautiful shadows across the land one last time. And so, as the final rays of that long imperial day began to truly fade, a different kind of quiet settled over the lands. The air grew cooler, the stars began to appear with a new sharpness, and the distant sounds of the world outside the empire's traditional boundaries seemed to carry a little further on the evening breeze. A profound stillness descended, a gentle pause, as if the entire world held its breath, waiting for whatever the encroaching darkness might bring with it. As the final rays of that long imperial day began to truly fade, a different kind of quiet settled over the lands. The air grew cooler, the stars began to appear with a new sharpness, and the distant sounds of the world outside the empire's traditional boundaries seemed to carry a little further on the evening breeze. A profound stillness descended, a gentle pause, as if the entire world held its breath, waiting for whatever the encroaching darkness might bring with it.
And indeed, as that profound stillness lingered, stretching across the twilight lands, it began to carry with it the faint, almost imperceptible echoes of something new. Far away, towards the distant horizon where the sun often made its first appearance, a different kind of strength was slowly and patiently consolidating itself. This was not a sudden, violent eruption, but a gradual gathering, much like the slow accumulation of clouds on a distant summer morning. A formidable presence, unlike any the ancient empire had truly encountered in its quiet latter days, was taking shape. Its influence began to stretch further and further west, like the lengthening shadows of a very late afternoon, reaching out from an unseen source. These emerging shadows, though not yet directly hostile, began to fall across the empire's remaining territories, even those far removed from the eastern borders. The quiet provinces that had endured, the ancient cities that still shone with a fading, wistful light, now found themselves subtly illuminated by a different sort of sky. It was as if the very air itself had grown heavier, thicker with an unspoken anticipation, a weightless presence that settled over everything. The familiar rhythms of life, though still present, felt subtly altered, imbued with a quiet, almost melancholic tension. People did not speak of it often, but the knowledge, like a persistent, low hum on a still night, settled into the deeper corners of their minds, that the great, familiar arc of their long history was bending, undeniably, towards a new and unknown direction. The nature of this impending change was not merely political, nor solely military. It was something far more profound, a deep and quiet shift in the very currents of time itself. The grand narrative that had defined centuries of existence, the stories of emperors and their legions, of laws and traditions, began to feel like faint echoes from a receding shoreline, growing softer with each passing moment. This new power, though geographically distant and largely unseen, exerted a sudden yet undeniable gravitational pull, gradually reshaping the psychological landscape of expectation across the land.
It quietly but firmly indicated that the world was preparing to turn a page, not just in a book of records, but in the vast, slow-moving chronicle of human existence itself. The long imperial day was not merely ending, it was giving way to an entirely different kind of night, one that would bring with it the quiet closing of an ancient chapter, signaling the approaching moment when the very last fading whispers of that long-spent era would finally drift away, carried gently on the evening air. The whispers, indeed, grew fainter, carried by winds that had, for centuries, gusted across the vast expanse of a continent. And at the heart of this diminishing sound, standing as the grand, weary sentinel of an age that was drawing to its close, remained the great city, once known as Byzantium, and then for so long as Constantinople. It was a place where ancient stones still held the echoes of emperors and scholars, where the last vestiges of a truly venerable tradition continued to flicker, a distant lamp in an increasingly darkening world. Its walls, though mighty, could not hold back the relentless, silent march of time, which eroded empires more surely than any siege engine. And so, after a journey that had spanned more than 1,000 years, a journey filled with triumphs and trials, with quiet innovations and persistent endurance, the moment of its quiet conclusion arrived. Not with a sudden, deafening crash, but more like the soft, final breath of a very old story reaching its natural end. The great city, after centuries of standing as a beacon, as a fortress, and as a repository of knowledge, eventually yielded. It was the closing of a truly long and storied chapter, a gentle turning of the page that marked an unequivocal end to a singular era. It was the closing of an unequivocal era, an epoch that had stretched across the lives of countless generations. This was more than just the changing of hands over a piece of land, however significant that land might be. It was the quiet, almost imperceptible drawing down of a vast historical curtain, bringing to an end a particular lineage of thought, a certain way of organizing the world, and a profound connection to an ancient heritage that had been maintained with steadfast dedication. The last whisper of this long era was not one of defeat or despair, but rather the soft rustle of leaves settling after a long autumn, a signal that the cycle was complete and the long imperial day had finally, truly faded into the twilight. Yet, even as this profound chapter closed, and the final echoes of that specific ancient world seemed to drift away on the evening air, nothing truly vanishes without leaving some trace behind. The long years of its existence, the vast influence it had exerted, the ideas it had fostered, and the paths it had carved did not simply disappear into the void. Instead, like stones dropped into a deep, still pool, the ripples of its being would continue to spread, subtly altering the currents of time, and quietly shaping the world that was to come, far beyond the moment of its own gentle conclusion. The story, in a sense, was never truly over. Indeed, the narrative of this ancient empire, though its own chapter concluded, did not cease to unfold in the grand tapestry of human events. Like the slow, deep currents beneath a placid surface, its influence continued to flow, quietly shaping the world that was to come in ways often unacknowledged but deeply profound. Its presence lingered, not as a thunderous proclamation, but as a persistent, gentle whisper carried through the ages, subtly altering the course of civilizations that followed. In the realm of art, the empire's aesthetic sensibilities, its elegant forms, and its deep appreciation for balance and proportion found new life in the works of later peoples. The graceful curves of its architecture, the detailed craftsmanship of its artisans, and the thematic richness of its stories all contributed to a shared pool of inspiration, from which subsequent generations drew without always realizing the ancient source. The very ideas of beauty and harmony that it had fostered continued to resonate, a soft, enduring echo in the creative endeavors of those who came long after. The thoughtfully constructed framework of its laws, too, left an indelible mark. Concepts of justice, the organization of governance, and the intricate balance of rights and responsibilities that had guided its society often served as quiet blueprints for the legal systems that emerged in its wake. Principles of equity, the methodical approach to administration, and even the nuances of civic duty were sometimes adopted and adapted, forming the very bedrock of new orders. These enduring legal precedents helped to maintain a sense of order and fairness across wide territories long after the original seat of power had receded from prominence. Even in matters of faith and philosophy, the empire's subtle touch could be discerned. Its quiet ponderings on the nature of existence, its approach to the divine, and its way of integrating spiritual understanding into daily life sometimes offered comfort or guidance to those seeking meaning in distant lands and future times. These ideas, like seeds carried on a gentle breeze, took root in unexpected places, growing into new expressions of belief, often without a clear memory of their origin. In countless subtle ways, from the curve of an archway in a distant city to the quiet logic of a legal principle we still observe, its gentle presence persists. Yet for all its quiet endurance, for all the threads it wove into the fabric of time, the empire itself, the vivid memory of its daily life and its grand ambitions, sometimes began to recede from the forefront of collective remembrance. Its very name, once a whisper on every wind, eventually seemed to become a softer echo, occasionally lost amidst the louder clamor of newer tales. The powerful story of its own making and unmaking, for all its lasting impact, sometimes began to fade from the prominent pages of common knowledge. In countless subtle ways, from the curve of an archway in a distant city to the quiet logic of a legal principle we still observe, its gentle presence persists. Yet, for all its quiet endurance, for all the threads it wove into the fabric of time, the empire itself, the vivid memory of its daily life and its grand ambitions, sometimes began to recede from the forefront of collective remembrance. Its very name, once a whisper on every wind, eventually seemed to become a softer echo, occasionally lost amidst the louder clamor of newer tales. The powerful story of its own making and unmaking, for all its lasting impact, sometimes began to fade from the prominent pages of common knowledge. And so, as we consider how such a monumental narrative could drift into less prominent remembrance, we might gently ponder the reasons for this subtle fading, this quiet withdrawal from the forefront of common historical thought. It was perhaps its very position, its extensive geographical reach, and its often distinct cultural identity, which placed it at some distance from the narratives that eventually came to dominate much of Western historical discourse. Many widely circulated accounts, particularly in later centuries, naturally centered on events and empires closer to or directly impacting the European continent, drawing attention to stories that resonated more immediately with those particular perspectives. The rich tapestry of this empire's life, therefore, sometimes found itself woven into a different part of the world's grand story, a part not always in the brightest spotlight of a common historical gaze. Furthermore, its narrative was not always one of dramatic, sudden collapse that leaves an undeniable, stark marker in time. Instead, its story was often one of gradual, profound transformation, a slow and intricate reshaping of itself over many centuries. It adapted, evolved, and shifted its very essence, changing its forms and names and influences in ways that were often subtle rather than abrupt. This long unfolding metamorphosis, rather than a sharp, memorable rupture, perhaps made it less easy to encapsulate into a single, easily retold tale, allowing its continuous presence to become less distinct, less sharply defined in the collective memory as the ages wore on. Its history flowed like a deep, meandering river, rather than plunging over a dramatic waterfall. Thus, the combined effect of its relative distance from the more commonly emphasized historical narratives of certain eras, coupled with the profound yet slow nature of its own internal evolution, allowed its deeply significant story to be somewhat overlooked for a time. It was not forgotten entirely, but rather its quiet strength and its lasting legacy often settled into the background, a silent testament to its endurance, occasionally overshadowed by the more immediate clamor of newer, louder tales that demanded attention. Its grand saga, once a vibrant song, slowly became a more hushed melody in the vast chorus of human history, waiting for those who would listen closely. Yet, its intrinsic importance, its deep impact on the paths of various peoples and cultures, and its lasting contributions to the very structures of our modern world remains undiminished. These echoes of the past, whether soft or strong, continue to shape our present in ways we often do not consciously perceive. And now, as the day's final light begins to soften and gently recede, much like these ancient narratives, we too can allow our thoughts to settle. Let the quiet rhythm of these fading stories guide your mind toward a deep and tranquil slumber, as the echoes of history gently dissolve into the calm, comforting embrace of the night. Yet, its intrinsic importance, its deep impact on the paths of various peoples and cultures, and its lasting contributions to the very structures of our modern world remains undiminished. These echoes of the past, whether soft or strong, continue to shape our present in ways we often do not consciously perceive. And now, as the day's final light begins to soften and gently recede, much like these ancient narratives, we too can allow our thoughts to settle. Let the quiet rhythm of these fading stories guide your mind toward a deep and tranquil slumber, as the echoes of history gently dissolve into the calm, comforting embrace of the night. And so, our journey through the distant avenues of time now softly concludes. We have traversed vast stretches, touched upon grand narratives, and perhaps, just for a moment, felt the lingering breath of empires long past. Now, as the last faint echoes of Byzantium begin to recede, like a ship slowly drifting from a distant shore, we can allow our minds to follow, settling into a quiet harbor. Let the intricate tapestry of those ancient days, with all its threads of power and thought, gently unravel in your mind's eye, becoming less defined, less urgent, as the night deepens around you, drawing its soft, heavy curtain across the world. Feel your own breath now, slowing its rhythm, deepening its path. Allow each inhalation to be a soft incoming wave, and each exhalation a gentle release, carrying away any lingering thoughts or concerns of the day. There is no need for analysis, no need for active contemplation, only the simple, steady presence of this moment, a quiet anchor in the vast ocean of night. Just as the ancient city, with all its complexities, has now become a memory, so too can your daily worries gently fade, softening their edges until they are no more than faint whispers on the very edge of your awareness, slowly dissolving into the tranquil expanse. Perhaps, for a fleeting moment, you might recall a faint, shimmering glimpse of a mosaic in a quiet, forgotten church within that ancient world. Not a sharp, vivid image, but just a soft impression of tiny colored tiles reflecting a distant, flickering candlelight. Or perhaps the barely perceptible rhythm of a calm, liturgical chant, barely heard, blending with the gentle splash of water against a stone quay centuries ago. These are but fleeting whispers, not meant to be held or understood, but merely to pass by, like wisps of cloud drifting across a vast, peaceful night sky. Allow them to simply pass, effortlessly, leaving no trace. Now, if you haven't already, you might allow your eyelids to feel heavy, gently descending, much like a soft veil drawing across the window of your waking world. There is nothing left to observe, nothing left to seek. Only the quiet, comfortable darkness behind your closed eyes, a space of pure, unburdened rest. Feel the comfortable weight of your body, supported and secure, as you sink deeper and deeper into the quiet embrace of your bed, into the profound stillness that precedes a truly restorative sleep. Let the final thoughts of history, like grains of sand, settle softly at the bottom of a calm, deep pool. All is quiet now. Rest well.